All right, so we're going to start off chapter 8, picking up right after where we left off with, we stopped with talking about mitosis. So one of the things we didn't get to talking about before the exam is what happens when mitosis goes wrong. I talked a little bit about this in previous chapters, but I want to talk about it in a little more detail. And so when cell division goes wrong, when it goes out of control, that's what can lead to cancer. So that's what we're going to start off this chapter with, and this is what's going to start off exam number 3. So when you've got cancer, what we're looking at is unrestrained cell growth, meaning these cells are dividing out of control. Remember, we started off chapter 8 talking about telomeres, where the cells no longer are limited by the number of divisions that they have, so they are allowed to divide uncontrolled. That allows them to build up mutations. And this is what can lead to what you know as tumors. Now, not all tumors are cancers. We'll talk about that here in a second. But cancer is the second leading cause of death in the United States. The first leading cause of death in the United States is heart disease. So it's just a little bit above cancer. A lot of this has to do with the fact that people are living longer. And so these are things that are tied to mutations. So let's talk a little bit about how cancer cells differ from normal cells, how they end up becoming these cancerous type cells. So one of the things that cancer cells end up doing is they end up having what we call an issue with contact inhibition. So normal everyday cells, if you grow them like you see here in a petri dish, or if they're growing in your body, they will continue to divide until they bump up against their neighbor. It's kind of like personal space. You know, we don't like to have people really close to us. Cells are the same way. If they have too many cells around one another, they're going to stop dividing because they need their own space. They need their own supplies. And so they'll stop dividing until one of those cells dies off, and then they'll start dividing again. Cancer cells, on the other hand, have no contact inhibition, meaning that they don't have this sense of personal space. So they'll just keep dividing and piling on top of each other. And so that's how we end up getting something like a tumor. Now, most of us are actually carrying around tiny versions of these because you do get groups of cells that end up having this contact inhibition problem. But they don't end up with the other characteristics that are tied to cancer. One of the other problems is that they get that ability to divide infinitely. So they end up with that error where they can turn on their telomerase, the enzyme that allows them to fix their telomeres, and they can just divide and divide and divide. They never get the signal to self-destruct. And that allows them to build up more mutations. You can see the big difference between these guys. The normal cells look like a normal cell, no changes to them. The cancer cells, on the other hand, not only are they dividing infinitely, but they start to mutate, they start to change. The last thing, and this is what really makes a cancer cell a cancer cell. So, like I mentioned, tumors by themselves are not cancerous. However, the last big characteristic is what makes a cancer cell a cancer cell. So, cancer cells have this reduced what we call stickiness. So normal cells, these guys tend to stick to each other really well. They kind of have a Velcro to each other, and so they stay stuck together and don't take off and move around. Cancer cells, on the other hand, have lost their stickiness, and so they tend to break off and move around in the body. And this is what causes what we and the medical profession tend to call cancer, because this allows them to move out of the area of their original tumor and start locating into new areas of the body. So these three characteristics are some of the features that are what we consider cancer. Now, like I said, there are tumors, not all of them are what we consider cancer. Benign tumors are the ones that we regularly have removed. They can be removed safely because they stay in one place in the body. Sorry about that. And so these are the ones that they've got that contact inhibition problem. They are dividing indefinitely, but they haven't gotten to the point where they're moving around in the body. Now, malignant tumors, these are the ones that we call cancer. That ability to move around in the body is what we call metastasis. Metastasis is what makes cancer cells a problem. You can see over in the picture over here, this is an individual who's had a marker put in their body and then had a test run so that you can see the cancer masses. Each of these bright white areas in the body is a tumor, and this is a malignant type of cancer because it has moved through the bloodstream and through the lymphatic system, that system that our immune system uses to help protect us. So they've been able to use basically like our body's highway to make it from one area of our body to another. So, this you can probably see is a problem. But then the question is, how does cancer kill an organism? Because, having these cells growing and spreading doesn't sound quite so bad, but what are they doing? So what is cancer? How does it causing death in an organism? So here's the problem with cancer cells. So one, you've got cells that are moving to other areas of the body, so they're not going to generally function the same way. But the bigger problem is you're getting a mass of cells in an area that is going to start taking up more and more space, and it's going to start taking up more and more resources. And so you can see here in the picture, we've got a mass of cancer cells, in this case in a lung. And so what they're going to do is they are all pushing around against each other, but they're also going to start pushing against all the healthy cells. And that's going to put stress on those healthy cells in that area. They're also, like I said, going to steal the resources from those healthy cells. And so they're going to start basically kind of starving those healthy cells and start causing problems, in this case in the lung, in the way that those cells are going to be able to function. And it can eventually lead to death because the cells in those organs are going to start to break down, and the functions of those organs are going to break down. So depending on which one it is, it can be very problematic. Now, you may have heard of different treatments that we have for cancer. Some of you may know someone in your family or friends who have had cancer or cancer treatments. There are many different types of cancer treatments. There are some newer ones. The traditional ones are radiation and chemotherapy. Radiation is where we use literally radiation to target the cancer cells. The idea is to disrupt the cells with higher doses of radiation to basically destroy them. And then chemotherapy, we have different types of medications that the main goal here is to basically stop the cell division of the cells and shrink those tumors. So why is the treatment for cancer often considered as bad as the disease? Oh, sorry. So the big problem here is that both of these treatments can affect healthy cells as well. So radiation, as we've talked about, radiation is one of the ways that you can get mutations that could possibly lead to cancer. So sometimes that radiation treatment could possibly trigger a new tumor. And in some cancers, it may actually expand a tumor because it accelerates those mutations. And also the radiation treatments can make people feel very ill. And the chemotherapy treatments, the chemotherapy is something that actually does make people feel very ill because these chemotherapy drugs are affecting those healthy cells as well as the cancer cells. So the chemotherapy cells, the chemotherapy is affecting those cancer cells by stopping or slowing their cell division. But there's no way right now for us to just target the cancer cells, so it also affects all of the other cells in their division. This is why people who are undergoing chemotherapy often lose their hair, because those are the most rapidly dividing cells in our body. And so those cells stop dividing, stop producing the proteins to make our hair. This is also why people who are undergoing chemotherapy often lose their appetite because their digestive system is being affected. So, so that wraps up the section on cancer. Like I said, this is tied to that last section in this chapter we talked about as far as mitosis. So after this section, there are several videos about meiosis that follow along with the chapter worksheets, and then you'll see me again for a couple of sections in this chapter 8 area.